From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Decant. Most importantly, you are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. I was thinking we begin tonight's episode, an update on disappearing planes, with a lovely piece of correspondence we received from Fatigued and Flying. Weirdly enough, I don't want to say it's in defense of Boeing, but I think it's a good entry point for us. Fatigued and Flying says, howdy you all. I am Fatigued and Flying here. I'm way behind, unfortunately, but catching up. Want to make sure something's clear here. Do not conflate airline maintenance issues with Boeing failures. The real stuff they don't want you to know is there's been an uptick in airline maintenance issues to the point I'm getting stories from captains regarding flagrant disregard of maintenance at a certain airline. Yet the airlines can publicly turn around and blame Boeing. Things like a wheel falling off, that's a maintenance issue, not a Boeing issue. I would not be surprised to see an FAA investigation by the end of the year. Keep the dirty side down. Fatigued and Flying.
I don't know that expression, but I think I like it. I mean, that makes sense. These planes go through so much wear and tear, and they're not like guaranteed to be impenetrable. You know, you have to change the oil on your car, and that's not the responsibility of your car's manufacturer, is it? You know? Got to get new tires, rotate your tires, and all of that. It makes sense that that would be kind of an easy scapegoat. You know, again, not in defense of Boeing. They've definitely made some serious oopsies, but I can't see how some of these mistakes could be kind of like pushed off onto the manufacturer rather than, you know, copping to a maintenance flaw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's one of the one reason, and wrote back to Fatigued and Flying, and one reason thought that was such an important point is because of the news seems to be ignoring it a little bit, especially when headlines go viral. And right now, if you look around the media landscape for the past few years, it seems like planes are constantly encountering accidents and disaster. It reminds me, I don't know if we ever talked about this on air, but do you guys have a scariest flight you've ever taken that you remember thinking this might be the one?
Just a little, you know, extra rough air. Isn't it funny? I was thinking about this recently. They used to call it turbulence. Now they call it rough air, which seems like a total kind of like sugar coating of turbulence, you know, like in airplane speak, right? It's a little bit more palatable, rough air versus turbulence.
But turbulence in itself was already a term that kind of didn't mean anything except for what it meant. And it I don't know, just, hey, we're going to experience a little turbulence, everyone. And really, the plane is going to be shaking. You're going to be thrown around a little bit. It's going to be terrifying.
But am I wrong in that they've kind of ceased to use that term and they've replaced it with rough air? I swear I haven't heard anybody say turbulence in many years.
I still hear turbulence, and it may not be a mandate. Or if it is, it may be like an airline preference mandate. So it might depend on the airline you go to and the nature of your pilot. The scariest flights I have been on, I love flying. I don't have fear of it, but the trickiest ones have inevitably been on really small planes, and not in the U.S., like on like puddle jumpers somewhere, because then that's when the turbulence or the rough air can really start ping-ponging you around. But still, statistically, it is safer to fly than it is to drive or ride in a car in the United States.
Hell, even to walk sometimes, if you're like adjacent to a roadway. And just to clear it up real quick, turbulence and rough air are kind of interchangeable. So it does seem like it might be a company line as to which term is used.
Mm-hmm. And over the past decade or so doing this show, Stuff They Don't Want You to Know, we've been able to identify certain trends in the world of conspiracy and conspiratorial thought. And today's episode examines this trend that has only appeared to grow over the past few years, the idea of something scary in the skies, particularly disappearing planes. Here are the facts.
Well, given that, aviation, powered flight in the timeline of humanity is a relatively recent development, it could be seen as a bit surprising when one has the realization that it's a bit tricky to figure out exactly how many planes exist, whether in the air or just in general. I'm sure there are ways of course, there are ways of tracking flights, commercial flights, but that doesn't take into account everything. And I'm sure that's not something that without some serious digging, your average mortal would have access to.
Yeah, it's tough because you can look at the manufacturing numbers of the big boys in the game, like the Airbuses and your Boeings, but so many individual planes have been built over the past century. Like you said, many are retired or they've been dismantled, destroyed, crashed, or disappeared. There was a pretty good move back in 2017, found some pretty solid estimates that claimed at that time, in 2017, there were an estimated 39,000 planes on the planet, which honestly didn't seem like that many to me. Maybe it's not counting helicopters. Are we counting military craft as well? Because we'll never really know how many military craft are out there. But it looks like over the course of history, from all the publicly available information, the number was something like 150,000, which still seems small to me. But, I guess most people don't own a plane, right?
And just to backtrack on what I said ever so slightly, there are flight tracker websites that give you a pretty relatively accurate estimate of how many planes are currently in the air. And typically between 7,782 and 8,755 commercial planes are in the air at any given time. And again, that does not take into account the retired ones, the ones that have been grounded, dismantled, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, and to that point, later in just a few minutes, we'll get to introduce one of my favorite stalkery websites for the friendly skies. A very exciting way to lose a couple of hours.
The stuff Elon Musk and Taylor Swift don't want you to know, right?
Right, just so. Private plane enthusiasts in general. So Boeing, in 2017, same year, Boeing said, look, civilization overall is going to need another almost 40,000 planes, 39,620 over the next 2 decades. So if all those estimates held correct, the number of aircraft would be something like 63,200 something in 2037. Of course, those estimates did not factor in a global pandemic, which absolutely walloped pretty much the majority of industries on the planet. Air travel was no exception. Did you guys ever travel, take a flight during COVID, during those restrictions?
No, not during the lockdown. No,
it was not fun.
I bet.
It was easy to get on the plane, if you had your right paperwork, but all the little fun parts about riding on a plane were out the window, except for sitting by the window seat. That was the last perk.
Wasn't there a period though where flights were grounded, like pretty much indefinitely, or was there always an ability to take a flight if you had the had the bravado to do so?
Yeah. So the actual stand down was pretty abbreviated.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, and we know that a lot of commercial carriers, when they couldn't get human passengers, they started hauling cargo and hauling freight just to keep the businesses going. Also, no country geopolitically wants to lose its airline because at some point it becomes a military capability, and you don't want to rely on another country for that. So you get a little, I'm not going to say it's easy to run an airline. It is absolutely not, but you get a little more TLC from your home government because they want you to stay in business too. But the cool thing is, unless you're terrified of planes and you hate them, the cool thing is there was this huge rebound so everything goes to pot in 2019. In 2022, it's predicted, these predictions seem in line, it's predicted that overall air travel is going to be higher than it was this year before the pandemic. So there are going to be 4 billion travelers in 2024. which is a pretty astonishing number. That's 103% of what it was in 2019.
Is that just a product of people finally becoming fully comfortable? Has there still been sort of some gun shyness surrounding flying and then getting sick potentially? Or what does that represent? That's very, very interesting, kind of alarmingly large number.
Yeah, maybe some people probably had money that they were going to spend on vacations that they just saved for several years. So maybe now people are, for instance, going to take that honeymoon that they had planned on. There could be any number of reasons, but this is good news, right? But along with this good news, there are a lot of complications. I love that we're mentioning private planes. Environmental damage became a huge, sticking point in online conversation. The maintenance just gets more expensive the more planes you have and the more active they are. And then the infrastructure, I hope we don't sound like stodgy old curmudgeons when we're complaining about, water mains and crumbling bridges. But have you guys met an air traffic controller? They're intense and they're kind of stressed out.
I actually recently saw a TikTok or something where it was some audio recordings of pilots communicating with air traffic controllers, and they've got some funny, snarky little in jokes. And I wish I could remember exactly what it was, but it was a really interesting peek behind the curtain. I bet you could just Google it, and I think it would probably be, it wasn't anything alarming, but it was some kind of gallows humor for sure.
Oh, I bet. Yeah. And I know also that there are boat controllers, right, who do the same kind of thing for watercraft. And they're just as stressed out because updating the comm systems and updating the control tower and things like that, it's one of those expenses that people don't think about until it breaks. The skies are getting crowded. If you go to...
think about how high the stakes are.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
exactly.
If you mess up just a little bit, you could kill hundreds of people.
Right. And we can always re-record on Wednesday.
Exactly.
That's very true. It's interesting, though, how it takes a lot to fully erode the trust in air travel, even with all of these, seemingly disastrous occurrences that have been happening. It seems a little bit with more frequency lately. It doesn't seem like it's been a death knell for the industry, right?
Yeah. And a big part of that is because the industry of the type of craft that are around now and used commercially, they've been normalized. You know what I mean? We see, jetliners are not a thing, because jetliners were not normalized when things went wrong, right? People are giving Tesla and Cybertruck a hard time for valid reasons, but obviously one big part of that is that they are new. You know what I mean? Ford's breakdown too. We've heard the acronym found on road dead, but because they've been around so long, people will just shrug and say mistakes happen. I mean, like you said, are there more disasters in the sky now that we've gone from the friendly skies to the crowded clouds? Or is it just that we're seeing more, we're hearing more about it? Boeing had 9 separate issues within the span of 3 months of varying severity, from the wheels to the windows, interior. Yeah. And then of course, deaths of former employees, whistleblower statements. People started to wonder if there was a conspiracy with Boeing. But again, you kind of preface the auto to aircraft comparison, because if you don't take care of, your Honda Odyssey or whatever, it's not Honda's fault when it breaks down.
Well, but it's Honda's fault if they put the pieces together wrong, which is
that's
what
true.
Boeing's whistleblowers are saying, which I think, when we talked about in the past, I think there's definitely a conspiracy there just to put profits over anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would tend to agree with you. I think the maintenance, though, to fatigued and flyings, I think that point has to be in the conversation.
Yeah, I
because
agree.
Sure.
Definitely maintenance. It's not just one lone gunman of problems in that regard.
But I'm just imagining if you need to change the oil on your car, right? it doesn't matter if the container that holds your oil is manufactured incorrectly and has some dang holes in it.
Right. A lot of it's the engineering. A lot of it. Like, one thing I've noticed more often now with at least internal combustion cars, newer models, the way their like engineering priorities are increasingly inconvenient for the person who owns the car or the person who works on the car. Like you should, if you build cars, folks, if you design them, first, thank you so much. Big fan. Secondly, please make it easy to get to the battery.
Jesus.
Please make it like reasonable to change the oil. This is ridiculous.
I need you to remove 4 pieces of this vehicle before you can access the battery, which is the thing that's going to die.
Front panel or whatever. No, I do think it's worth pointing out too. I mean, Matt, I think you're absolutely right that Boeing is certainly at fault, and there does seem to be a culture of kind of cutting corners. But based on what we're talking about with COVID and the need to kind of claw back some of those profits that were lost, I think both the manufacturers and the airlines have equal kind of reasons to potentially, maybe cut a few corners here and there to try to get those profits back up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the blood price, right? Now, how much profit would you trade for human lives? But this is also bigger than Boeing. In each of those cases we're talking about, you have to individually look at them, right, to determine the chain of responsibility, where any blame might be found. And that's what authorities are doing now. But the reality of the situation is there are more planes in the sky. There are crowded clouds. If you want to get a sense of it, here's the website we were teasing earlier. Go to flightradar24.com. It is an active live map of the world. And it shows you where the majority of the world's planes are right now. If you click on it, it's nuts, especially when you zoom out. I'm getting lost in it.
Does it have X-37B on there?
No, because it's too high up.
Too high? Dang.
Yeah, it's too high up. And the dumbest thing I've been doing for the past few months is I'll get onto this site and I'll just check on Antarctica. I just want to see.
Just make sure they're doing okay.
Because nobody can fly over the ice wall, baby.
That's right. Mountains of madness. And we're gonna pause before we ascend the peak of madness here. There are more opportunities now for mistakes, accidents, and disasters. And yes, some planes simply disappear. No one's sure what happened to these planes, but we do hopefully have some updates. Here's where it gets crazy. All right, it sounds bonkers, right? To say, we lost a plane. We know they're big, but we lost a plane.
Well, there's so much technology on each one of those planes that are meant to ensure that very thing never happens. Even if it goes down, even if it catches on fire, explodes.
Well, the famous black box, right?
Right. Yeah.
Supposedly indestructible.
Mm-hmm. And is meant to carry the sort of the electronic and mechanical equivalent of the last words of the plane. If something goes wrong, so you can figure out, you can conduct forensics and see like, oh, this temperature sensor said this, or this altimeter reported this.
Well, and they have complex transponder services and systems on them that should allow for anyone to recover it, even if it's at the bottom of the ocean, like 13,000 feet below the sea or something, or even further.
Even Point Nemo stuff, you should be able to find it. But
it's down there somewhere.
Yeah. Point Nemo is the most remote part of the Earth, folks. If you make it out to Point Nemo, in a very intimidating, distant part of the Pacific Ocean, this is true. The closest people to you are going to be the astronauts in the International Space Station. That's how far away that is. That's how big the Pacific Ocean is. And I think maybe that's the most important part to remember when we ask about losing planes. There's just so much area to search. And you're right, Matt. GPS, satellite networks, these great improvements in surveillance and communication would make us think the days of Amelia Earhart are a thing of the past. But lessening the chance of a disappearance is not the same thing as reducing it to zero.
So the most infamous recent disappearance that we might start with today would be that of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 or MH370, which on March 8th of 2014 was heading from Kuala Lumpur, which is the capital of Malaysia, to Beijing when it took an unscheduled, deviation from its flight path. It turned west across the Malay Peninsula. And if anyone, has watched TV series or whatever about terrorism in the air or whatever, there's a show recently called Hijack. It was on Apple. When a plane deviates from its flight plan, it's a big deal. Like, people notice this because it could, indicate that there's something very bad that is happening up there in terms of the pilot no longer being in control of the plane, right?
Yeah, and it also depends if it's a manual shift, right? Or if if you recover something and it shows to some kind of automatic system that shifted the flight's path.
Right. And also it's an interrelated system, especially as there are more planes in the air. When you deviate from a path, you risk a domino effect, right? Of all the other things. It's kind of like an on-the-ground version of this would be if you are ever in a parking lot and you see someone has done a crappy job parking, ride on
everybody
over
else.
the line. Well, also, we have to exercise empathy, because the person who looks like they did a bad parking job, they may have only done that because the person before them left and
There's
now
no
they
longer
look
there.
like
And then that person's left
Right,
looks
that's what
like
I'm
it was. Yeah, no, you're totally right, dude. Yeah, I for a moment I was like, empathy for those monsters, never. But Ben, you're right. There's oftentimes an unseen factor.
There's always a BMW Prime.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Or a
There's
Honda Odyssey.
There's a Toyota Mary. Yeah. All three villains. So yeah, we talked about MH370 in 2019. I think that's a great quick and dirty recap. The reason this still remains such a mystery is that a lot of planes that disappear are your smaller things, your Pipers, your privately owned or piloted things in remote parts of the world where, and I'm not dismissing the tragedy at all, but a smaller amount of people disappear. This is a Boeing 777. It had 239 people on it.
And that's the thing, like I was saying too, I mean, there's just so many eyes on these things because a little deviation like that could affect other flight paths. It could cause a collision, mid-air collision, or any number of things. So there, could be international eyes on it, depending on what parts of the skies, this is taking place in, not just the air traffic controllers of the originating, country.
And the origin of the passengers and the social position of the passengers also plays a role. These people were from 15 different countries. They were flying internationally. So yes, there were a lot of eyes on. Immediately, to the credit of the authorities, people are searching everything they can, and they spend months looking at. The first search is 52 days. It is covering they have hundreds of other flights going over the flight path and anywhere near it, over ocean where currents may have washed things around. They cover 1.7 million square miles. And at first they find nothing. It's as if the plane vanished, which led to a lot of conspiracy theories. Of
course. Yeah, makes perfect sense. I mean, those kinds of questions would be being asked.
Before we get to the theories, let's walk through some of the ins and outs. So multiple governments, like we said, were involved. They spent something like $150 million, Australia, Malaysia, China, and I think Japan. And they had a search where they covered 46,000 miles of ocean. And then in 2017, they called off the search and they said, we're not finding stuff. But that obviously didn't satisfy the family members and the loved ones of those 239 people. So they pressured the Malaysian government, and the Malaysian government launched a new search with private industry, a really interesting company called Ocean Infinity. They're very good at what they do, but unfortunately, after months of searching in this other partnership, they didn't find anything.
Would these be like unmanned small submarine craft?
when Paul and I were working with John Walzak on Missing Season 1, which is about a mysterious plane disappearance, we used one of those underwater vehicles, like a remotely operated vehicle.
Now, to my understanding, Ocean Infinity struck a deal with Malaysia to basically search, and if they didn't find anything, they wouldn't get paid. That was kind of the deal they struck, which is an amazing deal for Malaysia because, my gosh, if it fails, if the search fails, then you don't have to pay anything, and that's what happened, right?
Is this an example of a company trying to make a name for itself and we're rolling the dice on a deal like this?
I mean,
it's very interesting. It seems like a very risky move.
Maybe to some degree, they were founded in 2017, so they were not around when this occurred. But they've done a lot of other operations. They've located wrecked watercraft and stuff like that. So they weren't acting in bad faith. I think they, like most people, were just personally hoping to contribute to closure in this situation.
Well, I'm certainly not suggesting they were operating in bad faith necessarily. I just think being willing to take that deal, it seems like the benefit to them would have their names in the headlines and to kind of make a name for a relatively newly established company, have a big success.
To my understanding, that 46,000 square miles that you're mentioning that was previously searched, right? Ocean Infinity said, okay, we've got this drift study. So if there was debris anywhere in that huge sector of the ocean that was already searched, if it did drift, it probably went north in this direction. So they said, we're going to search that area, and that's going to be our plan, right? But since that failed, I don't know. I guess I'm really interested to hear what these updates are, because, man, it feels like if that amount of ocean has already been searched, where the heck else could it be?
Yeah, exactly. Where else could it be? And the issue too is that already we see speculation thriving, right, on things like where the location of the craft could end up, right? And a lot of oceanography has to be involved when we're thinking through the passage, the post-accident passage. A lot of folks were saying in the beginning maybe it crashed in the Indian Ocean after running out of fuel, which is terrible because the Indian Ocean is a pretty dangerous place to crash. And the thing is, the pieces started washing up to the shore over time. 20 pieces 20 pieces of debris, just chunks of stuff that were believed to be from the plane, were located around the coast of the African mainland and then a bunch of small remote islands in the Indian Ocean.
Which is, I believe, Madagascar, Mauritius, Reunion, and Rodriguez.
Yeah, Reunion is probably one of the best examples. In 2015, just a little while after the crash, people found a large object, something that I was not familiar with. Apologies, aviation experts, a flaperon. Which I think is a kind of a silly name, but a flaperon is it's a thing on the wing. They found a flappy-doo from the wing. It definitely came from a Boeing 77, and given the timeline, that means it was almost certainly 370.
Is that the flaps they're talking about? Okay,
yes.
This is just the long name. They shorten it to flaps, full flaps. That's how you grade your angle, and move, your trajectory of height.
Because flaperon sounds silly. It's a silly thing for a pilot to say. Like, we're adjusting the flaperons.
Indeed.
Flaperon sounds like an insult from Don Quixote.
It really does, like you'd slap somebody with a glove. I don't know why.
It says here on the Wall Street Journal that flaperons help stabilize planes during low-speed flying, during takeoff and landing.
And they're a portmanteau of flap and aileron.
Sure they are.
They are. No, that's true.
What? What's the second word?
Aileron.
Well, now we have a whole other word we have to explore. I don't know that one either.
So it's astonishing, I think, the just how far these individual pieces of what appears to be a single plane have washed, to the earlier point about drift and currents. That's frightening.
I guess my question, though, and I know that we're going to get to some of this, is like, would this have been some sort of catastrophic failure, like a midair explosion that would have tossed debris, but only some of it? Like, why would there have only been like parts if it all went down in one piece?
Well, from the
I guess
height,
an impact, the ocean impact, but I mean, if it runs out of fuel, couldn't they coast and do like an emergency water landing without having some sort of insane impact that would have caused, some sort of catastrophic, destruction?
it goes into a lot of the different theories, right? I think we're gonna jump into all that stuff because there are reasons, plausible reasons for a plane to just continue flying in some direction until it runs out of fuel and then impact the ocean.
Autopilot is a hell of a drug. Yeah, this is true. After more than 4 years of searching and investigating this stuff, there was an official report released. It was a novel. It was 495 pages in 2018. And people were very unhappy with it because despite 500 or so pages of research, there were no conclusive answers about what happened. And that's horrifying if, one of your loved ones was on the plane. No one knows why it went off course. No one knows exactly where it is today. It's one of the greatest aviation mysteries of all time. So there's no surprise people have cooked up all sorts of strange theories about the disaster. Some are distressingly plausible. Others are downright bizarre to the point that people involved have felt even bringing them up is disrespectful. Should we start with the most plausible ones?
I think so.
Running out of fuel? That makes sense.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess that was one of my questions was if you did run out of fuel, you would be forced to make an emergency landing at sea. It's part of the whole spiel that you hear, in the event of a water landing and all of that stuff, you inflate your life vest before you help, the young person that you're with or whatever. So this is definitely a scenario that we've all mentally been prepared for in the most kind of cutesy of video presentations to make, hey, don't actually worry about it, but we are required by law to express this eventuality.
Yeah. And if you, like some of us in the crowd today, if you're one of those people who loves sitting in an exit row because you like the idea of being heroic, you might be surprised to know those inflatable water slides things. Yeah. I don't think they're really used, very often.
But it is a possibility, right? You can make a water landing.
You can. People have.
It's just not going to go the way maybe you think it is in your head if you're just a passenger and you look at the fun images that you see or you watch the video that Delta makes. It's a little different.
Well,
but again, I've never been in that situation. Have you guys ever been in an emergency plane situation? I've never experienced it.
Yes. Water slide, no.
But I mean,
which is a bummer.
There are, of course, crafts that are designed to land on water that have those little bumper thingies,
puddle jumpers.
Yeah, puddle jumpers. They're literally designed to. They have these not inflatables, but like flotation things that are kind of built in, and that's perfectly normal. It's part of protocol. But a giant jumbo jet, literally flying under just nothing but its own weight, with no engines and no ability to hit a runway correctly with the wheels. I mean, that would be a massive impact, wouldn't it? It's not as rosy as the video presentations at all.
Two things. First, particularly with what you're bringing up about the Delta, the instructions that play on a plane or that are acted out in smaller planes. One thing that always astonishes me about those is, first off, flight attendants are there for safety and they bust their humps. They're very unappreciated. And one of the strangest, most impressive things is how they learn to stay smiling no matter what they're saying. You know what I mean? It's like no smoking. And I don't know how, it's a specific type of smile you are taught in that profession. But the second thing is, I was trying to remember the name of this. What's the pop culture term for when people just act like idiots in an airplane? I swear to God, there's one. When people start freaking out, making
Is it like sort of like affluenza, but
Kind
like
of.
airplane bad behavior? I can't think of it off the top of my head. Yeah. I can't think of it off the top. Yeah.
But there is, I feel like there is a term.
If there's not, there damn well should be, because it certainly is a thing. But also,
flight fury.
There you go, Ben. That makes absolute sense. And I was just on a 10-hour flight. And the only way to get through those, if you're not lucky enough to have some sort of sedative, is like they dim the lights. They make it as placid as possible. They make it as mellow as possible, because let's face it, guys, we're in a giant metal tube careening through the air with nothing but like science to holding us up there. And not to say that science isn't a very important, powerful force, but it requires a little suspension of disbelief to not be terrified, of being in that situation, especially for 10 hours over the ocean, open ocean.
But guys, I want to bring something up, which is one of the more terrifying things that I can imagine happening on a plane. And it has to do with the fact that the main problem occurred 38 minutes after takeoff with MH370, which some experts believed pointed to depressurization of the cabin early on as it reached altitude. So as it got up, there was something wrong in the plane to where it didn't pressurize correctly. Oxygen wasn't flowing correctly for both passengers and people in the cockpit. And it caused everybody on the plane to basically lose consciousness before they could.
The masks were deployed.
Before they could change things or repressurize the cabin or get back down to a lower altitude.
Right after after they had spoken with ATC, with air traffic control, and things looked like they were on the literal up and up. It's also, I don't want to lose flight fury. I think I'm onto something with that. If there's not already a term.
But Ben, isn't that depressurized situation when the masks drop? Doesn't it detect a change in cabin? Sorry, I'm just regurgitating all the stuff I've learned from the in-flight video. But maybe once again, that's not enough. Maybe
it's not necessarily, right? It depends on, are those sensors working? That's one of the first questions, right? What is the rate of depressurization? Does it feel like, also 38 minutes in, we don't know if they had already done the thing where you dim the lights, right? And maybe people start falling asleep and you think they're just settling in for the flight.
And to quote Tyler Durden from Fight Club, oxygen gets you high, makes you docile. You accept your fate. Like, again, do you have to wonder, is this something that's actually designed to save you, or is it something that's just designed to take the sting out of your ultimate demise, or just make you kind of like, just fade?
Well, the thought is it would keep you alive until the pilots could get the plane back to a place where it needed to be, right?
I'm being a doom monger. I apologize.
I don't think it's doom mongering. I think of that every time, I see those old school drills where it's like, in case of a nuclear attack, get under your desk.
Right.
Or what's the old joke about the crash position they used to teach you on planes? Put your head between your legs so you can kiss your ass goodbye.
Hey,
it is better than nothing. The idea of depressurization, of creating a zombie flight, is unfortunately plausible. Autopilot could keep going for some time. Most modern, I'd say the majority of modern commercial airliners do use autopilot.
But surely the pilots wouldn't depend on some sort of auto system deploying. They would probably have freestanding oxygen masks they could put their hands on, and then they know what was going on. They put that thing on. You'd think that the pilots would have more specific equipment to deal with something like that, and then they wouldn't necessarily be in the exact same boat as the passengers.
Some kind of cockpit redundancy.
I would think so. Like a literal mask that they have right there in the cockpit. They don't have to wait for something to deploy. I don't know. I'm wondering.
Another theory that I think captured people's minds for quite some time was the idea of a quote unquote rogue pilot, that someone was having personal issues that may have led to them, for one reason or another, deliberately trying to crash the plane, which would have made it a criminal act.
Well, yeah. Remember that pilot that took mushrooms 5 days prior to his flight and then totally lost his mind, on the flight? Remember that story, guys? We talked about
Yeah,
that
he
in
was a
Strange
passenger
News.
on that plane.
No, I'm sorry. That's right. But what? Oh, okay.
But he was
No.
able, because he's a pilot, he was able to get there. Yeah, he was able to sow havoc. And so the pilot that's accused of being a rogue actor, Zahari Ahmad Shah, the idea here is that still, like you were saying, Matt, depressurization occurred, but that he purposely depressurized the plane, causing that hypoxia, and then lowered the plane to 3,000 feet. And probably the more cinematic, very much unproven theory that people were floating around was that when he lowered the plane to 3,000 feet altitude, he parachuted out to meet his mistress in a boat.
A dinghy?
I don't buy it. I don't know.
That is real specific, y'all. Seems like there are better ways to make a splash. Sorry, no pun intended than that. Can't imagine. I don't know. That seems very elaborate.
Well, then what if the plane was hijacked? As a matter of fact, why don't we take a pause for a word from our sponsors? Because now I think that's the line of getting into the crazier theories.
I think that's right.
And we've returned. All right. So we have to be careful with the term expert when it's thrown around in the news, because people can be experts on one thing and it doesn't necessarily make them experts on another thing. You know, you could say, I am an expert on physics, but that does not make you an expert on volcanology, whether that's the study of magma or the study of Vulcans in Star Trek. I think, no, you know what? We're going to keep it in, but just to be fair, I feel like there's a lot of overlap between STEM experts and Star Trek fans. I feel like those two worlds go together.
What are STEM experts?
Science, technology, engineering, mathematics experts.
Yeah, I think you're right.
What? Tell us if we're wrong. Tell us if you're a hard science professor, you just hate Star Trek and don't get it. But look, the reason I'm saying the thing about the experts is that aviation experts have claimed that Russia specifically had the means and the motive to hijack Malaysia Air 370, and that we only think of it as a crash because things went wrong.
But to what end? I guess typically, like if there's a hijacking, it's usually almost like a hostage taking situation, and you usually have demands and there's some kind of communication that takes place. Are you saying that stuff might have been covered up, or I'm intrigued here.
The possible methods are interesting because Russia does have a lot of aerospace sophistication, right? They're very good at it. But it breaks down when this guy is talking about the motive. The aviation expert in particular, we're talking about a guy named Jeff Wise. And so Jeff Wise says Russia's motive for a hijacking or attacking 370 was to, quote, distract from the annexation of Crimea or to respond to sanctions imposed by the U.S. I don't know. That seems kind of like a roundabout. I feel like that just a cost benefit calculation. If you tried to blow up a plane or hijack a plane for that reason, to distract from Crimea, you would just be further in the news as a supervillain, right? For me, that doesn't hold up.
Yeah. I remember there was a lot of scuttlebutt at the time about the passengers on the plane who were, I know there was like an IBM former executive, or actually an actual executive from IBM, and a couple other people who were pretty high up in the tech world, as well as there were rumors about certain objects that were on the plane that were basically prototyped technology. But again, a lot of that stuff I didn't see fully substantiated. I don't know if you guys found anything about that stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate the use of the word scuttlebutt, because that's a lot of what it is. And these things seemed either somewhat misrepresented, some of the tales about the passengers, because again, it's 239 passengers and crew. So if you are connecting conspiratorial dots, it would be very easy and dangerously tempting to find one of those connections. You know what I mean? Or
Yeah.
to find something that seems like a connection.
Yeah, there was a lot made about this company called Freescale that makes microchips, and they do a lot of defense industry work, which I think, at least in my mind, was the unspoken connection that was made there when officials were thinking about Russia, as a possible culprit to, for some reason or another, take out the microchips meant for some defense purposes for other countries.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then going to the idea of secret cargo, right? 4 tons of top secret stuff. These stories begin departing the realm of fact and entering the land of folklore. And maybe this is where we talk about probably the most far out there. We weren't sure if we were going to mention it on air today, but the Stargate theory.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I'm so sci-fi pilled, I guess, that my mind immediately goes to like the plots of TV series like Lost, where like an airplane disappears and goes to another dimension or something like that, or is abducted in some way or slips through a portal of time space, right?
There's a video you can find. It was posted. I saw it on Reddit. I'm sure you guys did too. It appears to show a plane, a passenger jet, up in the sky, photographed by some kind of either infrared or other, photography methods. It appears to be encircled, I think is the word you might use, by 3, let's say, UAP or dots or other objects. Those dots seem to accelerate in their movement around the plane until the plane and the dots disappear. And there's absolutely no information concretely linking this video to Malaysia Airlines 370. There are statements that are made, and it's been reposted a ton, a lot of speculation from, a secondary or tertiary poster, and just goes down the line. As interesting and cool as it was, I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe that's what happened. That's why they couldn't find it. It disappeared because it was teleported. It does appear to have been pretty fully debunked by France 24.
Yeah. And that's kind of that is the typical course that those sorts of claims will take, because they happen pretty often in the world of aviation, but also in the world of maritime disaster, right? Because, again, people want an explanation for these things. None of these theories have been conclusively proven, even the most plausible ones at this point. We know the plane was there, things started getting wonky, and then pieces of what very much appears to be the plane washed ashore around the world, around the Indian Ocean. And we go to the head of the safety investigation team from Malaysia, Kok Soo Chan, who said, all the available evidence, and there wasn't much of it, irresistibly pointed, in their opinion, to unlawful interference, which many took to be a sign or a signal, dog whistle, that the plane was hijacked. But there was still no, outside of accusations from a few people, there's still no evidence of who might have interfered and why they chose to do so. Luckily, we do have an update. Malaysian officials recently said in a statement just a few days back that the government is ready to launch a new search operation. Ocean Infinity came back to them years later and said, look, we want to do this again. We've got lessons learned. We have better technology, better techniques. And then alongside that, there are people like the British tech expert Ian Wilson, who just last year said, I found the plane in a jungle in Cambodia. And the weird thing is that if the wreckage is in Cambodia, how did all this other stuff wash up from the Indian Ocean? You know what I mean? They're kind of contradictory.
Do we have any other information on that?
On the idea of the Cambodia theory?
It's just like somebody literally saw it on Google Maps and then didn't send a team out to investigate yet.
Yeah. Saw it on Google Maps. And if you go to...
oh my gosh, I'm looking at the picture right now.
Yeah, it's ambitious and optimistic to call it that plane crash in particular. You can read more about that in any number of outfits. Even a lot of British tabloids covered it for a while, like U.S. tabloids. But again, there's just no proof. And here's the thing: this is part of our setup. We will probably end up making this a multi-episode series going forward, because although MH370 was in the news so often, it's back in the news now, at least 8 other craft have disappeared since that disaster. In many cases, we're pretty sure bad weather or mechanical failure led to the issue, but some have also disappeared. A lot of these craft are smaller private planes, like we said at the top. Small size makes them easy to miss, especially over a remote area where those kind of planes are a common method of travel. And I guess the thing is, the reason I think we want to continue these explorations is because until the facts surrounding these disappearances get confirmed, the world is still going to wonder, rightly, is there something they don't want you to know? And shout out to everybody listening to this on a plane right now. Safe travels.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I thought about that.
Godspeed.
Do you guys ever save up podcasts and you listen to them when you're on a long flight or something?
I usually just watch the movies. Yeah, I just try to. I find movies are a good way to gauge time. I watched some really hilariously bad movies on this trip. Madam Web, guys, it is. Oh boy, it's a real
not good.
No,
that's what the lead actor said.
They said it was. They said it was bad, but it was. I found it delightfully bad. It was fun. Also, the Ferrari movie was not very good.
It has a Rotten Tomatoes rating of 11.
Yes, it does, sir. Yes,
and
it does.
Earned every percentage point. Yeah,
I think so.
I'm waiting for the AI movie mashups. I want to see Ferrari Web, which is the same characters from Madam Web.
I love it.
In a car show. And also, most importantly, folks, jokes aside, please stay safe out there. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your theories, and we want to be easy to find online.
We want to, and we hopefully succeed at being easy to find online at the handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on Facebook, where we have our Facebook group, Here's Where It Gets Crazy. Also on YouTube, where we have video content rolling out every single week. Got some really fun ones coming your way very soon. Also, finally, that handle is how you can find us on X, FKA Twitter. On Instagram and TikTok, though, we're Conspiracy Stuff Show.
Do you like calling people? Call us. 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, give yourself a cool nickname and let us know if we can use that name and your voice on one of our episodes. If you got more to say that can fit in a 3-minute voicemail message, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.